Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make books and courses for other potters who want to be more environmentally friendly in their pottery making. And that's what this podcast is all about. And I can't wait to get started. Let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about, just counting them up in terms of the tips, 8 tips for making pottery on the potter's wheel. And just to say, like, if any of these don't resonate with you, if you've been taught in a different way and that's like not the way that you like to do it or the way your teacher's saying to do it, that's okay. Just like take what you want from this episode. These are just things that like I've experienced and I've learned in my making pots on the wheel practice that have been really helpful to me. And yeah, I just thought I'd share them with you basically. So that brings us on to the first tip, which is do it your way. So basically, if say like you're taught in a certain way and it's not feeling right for like your body or your hands, so for example, I'm left-handed. I don't know whether that's something to do with this thing, but there was this kind of um, particular hold that the teacher, when I was learning to make pots on the wheel, still learning now, obviously, but that they said to me, "Oh, you need to do this with your knuckle and hold your hands like this," and it never felt right to me, and so I kind of moved into kind of doing it a slightly different way. And they basically said to me, "You won't be able to make like really big pottery with the way you're doing it. It's like you've got less strength basically in that stance that you're using now." And I was like, okay, well, but it meant that like it felt good to me, and it meant that I could like kind of continue making pottery because it felt good, on the potter's wheel. So yeah, so that's the first thing to say. Although you might be getting taught a certain way, and here are the general guidelines basically to like making pots on the wheel. If it doesn't feel right to you, then just do it the way that feels right to you because it will really help to make it like an enjoyable learning experience. And you know best. You can trust yourself and your own creative practice. Yeah. So, okay, the second tip, this is like a more kind of practical tip, I guess, is that before you make pottery on the potter's wheel, wedge the clay really well. So, some people call this kneading. In my pottery classes, we used to call it wedging, and you really want to have like really well wedged clay before you start making pottery because it can throw on the potter's wheel, because it can throw your pot sort of like off center if you have bits that aren't mixed in very well. So there's a bit that's like a little bit more different kind of dryness or something, or the pottery teacher would say to me, wedge it really well so all the kind of clay particles are like all aligned in the same way, sort of thing. And it means that when you're making your pot, you'll get like a beautiful sort of like consistent walled pot thickness of wall on the pot you're making, because the clay will be like a beautiful like even consistency all the way through if it's properly wedged. So yeah, if you don't wedge it, it can be really hard to like center your clay on the potter's wheel. So yeah, so that's number 2, wedge your clay really, really well. So the third tip is anchor your arms. Anchor your arms. So basically, anchoring your arms just basically involves putting your arms in a place that is like solid. So it means that you can make like a solid stance with your arms. So so if you're like learning on a pottery wheel that has like a sort of basin, you can anchor your arms on that basin. Some people anchor their arms sort of on their own body, like maybe on their leg or something, or like next holding their arms into their body. But like I would always use the edge of the electric potter's wheel that I used in a pottery class. Like I would always wedge like rest my arms on the basin of that, and it gives you a really strong stance, because you want your stance to be very strong and kind of like still, and not be kind of like you don't want the clay to be like pushing your arms around. You need to be in charge of where the clay is going, and you need to have a really strong anchor to be able to do that. So the teacher would sometimes like come around when I was like in a class, they'd be like, anchor your arms, anchor your arms. My arms would be like up, sort of up here, and kind of like not, you can't make pots if you don't, you're not telling the clay exactly where you want it to go. So yeah, tip number three, anchor your arms. Tip number four is I've just put down on my piece, my notes, water, 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 because you need, so I know I've noticed when I've watched other people make pottery that they don't always use quite as much water as like I use when I'm making my pottery. But basically, if in doubt, I just add water. So it's like water is the thing that you need to kind of help your pot, like, I guess, like, go around in such a way that's smooth, it's not kind of getting caught on your hands. You want there to be always water there, so you can kind of just have a the clay can be really smooth, a really smooth experience in terms of like getting, centered and brought up and opened out and stuff. And so yeah, if in doubt, add water. And you can always sponge out the water from inside the middle of a pot, like as you're making it. So it's just that where your hands are placed on that pot, you really need it to be like have lots of water on it. So yeah, that can actually bring your pot out of out of being centered. If you don't have enough water and you're trying to make a pot, it can kind of like your hands can kind of catch on the pot, and it can like make it really difficult to like to make it, can kind of throw it off kind of thing in terms of the shape. So yeah, water, water, water. That's tip number four. And then tip number five is, okay, so there's this, obviously, like when you're making pottery, there's like on the potter's wheel, there's kind of like distinct stages of that process. So first stage is like centering your clay, you're sticking it to the wheel, centering your clay. Next stage is the kind of opening out stage, and you're kind of widening the clay on the wheel. And then the third stage is kind of the bringing it up, and the kind of the, I guess, the fourth stage is really kind of like the shaping it, how you want it. So um I was always taught when I learned to make, when I learned, still learning, it feels weird to say I've learned, always learning how to make pots on the potter's wheel. But like that it's a really good idea to kind of like clean your area, your before you start sort of stages, I guess, like three and four, which is kind of like the more intricate shape creating stages. It's a really good idea to sort of clean down your pot. Because when you're centering and when you're kind of bringing the clay out, you can quite often get quite a lot of like, I guess, like slip kind of forming. Is the best way to describe it. Like just kind of like, the clay, wet clay that forms into a kind of slip. You'll kind of get that, all over you and all over your hands and all over the pot. And it's actually a great idea to kind of get a sponge and kind of clean that all away, clean your hands before you start making, the proper shaping. It will just make it like lots easier for you to kind of see what's happening, and kind of like it sort of resets you as well. Like, right, now we're going to shape, now we're going to make the pot. So yeah, so that's my tip number five. And then oh yeah, tip number six is to go slowly. So again, sometimes like I would be trying to make something and it would be getting thrown off center, and the teacher would say like the wheel's too fast, you need to slow the wheel right down. So at the kind of three you can go the third and fourth stage when you're kind of making the shape. That's when the wheel, for me, again, everyone's practice is different, but for me, that's when I slow the wheel down to the very slowest it can go, because I don't want it kind of getting, throwing the pot out. I don't want that kind of that force, like kind of forcing it out into a bowl shape, when I just want it to be like more of a cylinder. I want it to be going really, really slow and have like lots of control over the shape that that clay is making. So you can go, you need it to go, the wheel to go like very, very fast for the kind of centering stage, and then slower for the kind of opening out stage, but then as slow as it can go basically for the kind of the finishing, the shaping, finishing stages. In my opinion, that's when I found it like the most easy to make pots, and like the most control basically. And another thing to say about slowness is that what I always found as well is that the clay would move at a particular rate that it liked to go at. So, for example, if you're bringing that clay up, into a kind of cylinder shape before you're kind of bringing it out into the, the vase or whatever shape you want to make, the clay, you'll notice that the clay can only go at a certain rate. Like you can only bring it up the rate that it wants to go at. And if you go too fast, you can kind of end up like pulling off, pulling it off the potter's wheel, pulling the rim off or something. But so you can kind of feel how slow that clay wants to go, and you just have to go at the rate that it wants to go at, basically. And you can have a couple of goes, or however many goes you need, to bring that clay up. You don't have to do it all in one go. It's more just like and I guess different clays will have different rates they like to go as well, depending on how like viscous they are and stuff. So you can kind of get to know that rate of the particular clay you're using. But yeah, slower is better in general, for that kind of making stage on the potter's wheel. Um, okay, and then the seventh tip, this is a bit like out there, but in terms of like tips, is that you can have a go at making composite pieces. Um, so I actually did this quite far into my kind of wheel practice, and it was something that the teacher just said to me one day, like you could actually make that pot in two pieces. So it's because I wanted to make a vase which was like which had a very big kind of shoulder, a really really like nice beautiful kind of wide. I'll show you a picture. Showing you a picture. This is the vase I actually made when the teacher told me you can make them in two separate pieces. So basically the kind of the base of the vase is as wide as I could go, as wide as I could make it, and then the neck of the vase was a completely separate piece. And this enables you to make like really interesting shapes, because you can make a really tall neck that you wouldn't be able to make. You wouldn't be able to like kind of craft that clay in that way otherwise. It's kind of, well, maybe some potters could if they were very they're very very well practiced at making that shape. But I always found like that couldn't like sort of suddenly turn the clay and then make a big neck. I wouldn't be able to do that. But making composite pieces out of, say, like two different shapes, you can put them together at the leather hard stage, and you can make like really cool shapes. So with this to say, like you can it's ideal to kind of join those two things together when they've got a flat kind of edge to join them to. You can just like score it, put a bit of slip there, and then add them on. Leather hard stage is the perfect stage to do this at. If you're making a base separate to the neck, turn the base, or trim, some people call it like trimming, turning the base to get the foot like first, and then you can switch, like flip it over, and then you can add just literally put some slip on the neck, and then use the kind of spinning of the wheel to get that neck completely center. And then you can just sponge it, or kind of really press on that joint as the wheel's going around to kind of really join those two bits together. So yeah, composite pieces enable you to make really really cool shapes that you wouldn't necessarily be able to make. And when you're making the neck, obviously you just go down straight away, sort of all the way basically to the actual wheel head kind of thing. Just so you're making a completely, it's quite weird because you're like, well, I don't, your body wants to like not go right down, like right to, you think, this is going to need a base, this pot, but you can just go straight down, make a completely hollow neck, or you could cut it afterwards. You could always do that as well. You can sort of trim the different bits and then put them together. So yeah, so composite shapes are amazing. You might think that you can't do that because, say, like you're just starting out or something, but you totally can. So like it was something I hadn't done before, and the teacher said, why don't you just try making two bits and putting them together? And it really enables you to kind of really up level the kind of shapes you can make. So it's a really good thing to like have a go at, basically. And then the eighth tip for making pots on the pottery wheel. This might sound a really like boring one at the end, but basically, it was that when I was making pots on the wheel in a class situation, I would hate at the end, like feeling really rushed when I was kind of cleaning up. I'd be like, oh, I haven't got enough time. And I'd be like rushing around, putting my pot in the damp cupboard and stuff like that. And so the tip number 8 I've got is just really just give yourself lots of time at the end of the class or something, or, however bit you're making, if you have a potter's wheel at home or something, just give yourself lots of time to clean up, because the cleaning up stage can be a bit like, ugh, like, but it's like you don't want to be rushing and kind of making that even more unpleasant for yourself. Like I just found like if I had more time to do it, it would be like a more enjoyable experience. I could just kind of do it kind of like methodically rather than kind of in a rush, and that was like just way more pleasant. So that's my the 8th tip. Thank you so much for joining me for that episode. Yeah, look, wishing you very very happy potting, wishing you so so like, if you're practicing on the wheel, just like, yeah, just enjoy it, and like, don't compare yourself to other people. Don't think you can't do it. You so can, and you will get there. You will, every time you do it, you will close that gap between, what you want to make in your mind's eye, and then like your technical skills. You're closing that gap all the time. Just like keep going. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you on the next one. Goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me on that episode. And if you want to find out more about eco-friendly pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. Can't wait to see you there.